The Georgia Bulldogs are once again the SEC champions. The Big Dogs ate last night in Atlanta. 50-30 over LSU was the final score. We got a lot to unpack with this one because Georgia is undoubtedly the unquestioned number one team in all the land. They just dropped the mic on everybody last night. But we continue to talk about this year versus last year's team. We'll do some more of that in this video, but I think what I took away from last night was yet again, we see Georgia, the prize fighter, win a different style of fight. Because last night, LSU switched the tempo a little bit. Not so much intentionally, but Jaden Daniels gets knocked out of the game. Enter in Garrett Nussmeier. The entire complexion of their attack completely changed. Even with him in the game, they're actually throwing the ball reasonably well. They threw for 502 yards last night. And if you told me on Friday, hey, LSU's going to have some success through the air, throw for 500 yards. Oh, by the way, the game's not going to be close. You see the cognitive dissonance going in there for Georgia to be able to say, okay, you're going to throw for 500, you're going to score 30. Doesn't matter. We're going to control the game the entire time and score 50. Like, that's special. That's very unusual. That doesn't really happen in the game of football, let alone just college football. But a big reason why they can do that, a big reason why Georgia's able to play different kind of styles with you, Stetson Bennett. Folks, we got to have this conversation. Every single Sunday morning, it seems like I'm saying the same thing. Every week, teams say, well, if we can make Stetson Bennett beat us, we got a chance. If we can make the game, Stetson Bennett has to throw to beat us, we have a chance to win this game. No, you don't. Every single week, no. I assure you, that's not the kind of game that you want to play. Because LSU didn't do a phenomenal job, I guess, on either front, both rushing and passing, but we'll talk more about that. Stetson Bennett, 23 for 29. Extremely efficient, 274 yards, 4 touchdowns, no picks. If you force Stetson Bennett to beat you, he's proven multiple times he is liable to do so. And a lot of that is credit to Stetson Bennett growing in this system and taking a good self-evaluation over the offseason. Because a lot of the conversation around Georgia going into this year was, well, you kind of know what Stetson Bennett's going to be. You kind of know what you have in him. What can everybody else around him be? They have real good players at Georgia. There is no way around that. But Stetson Bennett has been a large reason why this team has propelled to the level that they're at right now. We've seen them play games where it's 16-6, it's on the road, it's cold, it's a physical style of ball game, it's a wrestling match, like I like to say, physical in the trenches, lean on you. Georgia wins that game. Georgia could have won that kind of game a season ago. But to win in a game where you got to score 50 because the defense allows 500 yards passing, regardless of how inflated that stat is, a lot of credit is due to Stetson Bennett. Make him beat you, right? No, that's not the kind of game you can play anymore. Really quickly, if you have not yet subscribed to the channel, it's the playoffs. They're here. You got to be locked in, and we got you covered all year round. Also, the portal's heating up. Recruiting is getting real right now. Make sure you're locked in with us on the channel. This is the People Show, so everything you know and love about college football, it happens here on a daily basis. Also, follow me on the socials, at JD Piquel on Twitter and on Instagram. This group is writing their own story. Because I know we want to lean into the Kirby dynasty and what they're going to be and how many can they win under him. Like, that's all going to take care of itself. I promise you that story will, we'll talk about that when that gets here. But keep in mind, last year's team, they didn't win an SEC title. They actually lost to Alabama, avenged that loss, the national title. That was huge. Great. That's its own story. This team, and Kirby said it post-game on the field, they wanted to do something that last year's team didn't. Actually, Georgia hasn't won an SEC title since 2017. So they did some things last night. Like, they made some of the history of their own. And it's not the same personnel as last year. The defense is a bunch of new faces. Almost 9 new starters now. Didn't matter. Still found a way to go undefeated throughout the regular season, win the SEC title. And I think another thing that's interesting, and we've said this before on this program, last year's team was so dominant, there wasn't really, outside of one game, a ton of test for them. Like, they just kind of showed up, did what they had to do, and it was dominance. I guess we'll count the national title as well. So outside of 2 games. Outside of playing Alabama, there wasn't really the need to have any response. Yesterday against LSU, they made them go 4 quarters. And credit to LSU because that's a good football team, and Brian Kelly is going to do a lot of good things at LSU. I'd be surprised if we don't see this matchup in Atlanta in the near future. in the coming years. May see a lot of LSU and Georgia, but the fact still remains the same. LSU pushed Georgia multiple times throughout the game. And like I said, you planned for Jaden Daniels. That was kind of the entire game plan defensively, was to be able to take away his legs and to, minimize everything in the pass game as well. And that ended up being a different case. But when Garrett Nussmeier came in, that changed the entire offensive approach. LSU, to stick with our metaphor here, they switched styles. They switched the kind of fight they were trying to play with Georgia. And Garrett Nussmeier came in and he was slinging it. But the response muscle of this Georgia team that they have developed over the course of this season, throughout the Kentucky game, throughout the Florida game, the Missouri game, all the times people were saying, is Georgia vulnerable? Or can you get them on the right day? All those kind of games, we saw the little incremental gains they made, and that response muscle showed up again in the SEC title game. And there was never a point where this game was ever, to my feel at least, in question. Like, Georgia was pretty firmly in control for the majority of the game, and that's credit to Kirby, credit to what they do internally, kind of hitting the reset button as they do better than anybody else in the country. But there was a point in this game where it felt like Georgia just really put their foot down and really had that response mechanism kicking in a big way. LSU is driving, get down inside the 10. The Georgia defense says, flexes their back up a little bit, bows their chest, gets a stop on downs on the 5-yard line. You say, okay, great. Huge stop for Georgia. The offense then goes 8 plays, 95 yards. And here's the biggest thing. Here's the biggest just attitude thing you can tell from this Georgia team. They threw 1 pass. So you had an 8-play drive with 7 runs. That is attitude. That is asserting your own will. That is dominance. That is preparation. Like, there is so much about this Georgia team you can bottle up and just show someone that drive and say, here it is. This is Georgia football. Like, they have reaffirmed, to my feel at least, the bar that is set in Athens. And I think a lot of it can be set in that drive. So we said the same thing with other programs, but I think this is more true for Georgia than anybody. The new season starts now. Everything that you wanted to do, you have accomplished. Written your own story. Gone undefeated for the 2nd year in a row in SEC play, at least, in the regular season. And then you win and win the SEC title. And I mean, that's huge. Enormous deal. Stetson Bennett compared it to win a national championship, if that tells you anything for how big a deal that is. But now understand, last year, Georgia was in hunting mode. It was, okay, we got to go and prove ourselves. We feel like we have the team to do it. The time is now for Georgia football. Well, now the narrative has shifted from, this is no disrespect to Nick Saban, it used to be, we want Bama. Like, that was the thing that people would chant, right? Now it's, we want Georgia. Georgia is now being hunted by everybody else. And I promise you, they're fine with that. They've earned that in Athens. They've earned that with what they've done this last year to 2 years. But the reality is, everything you did to this point, that's great. The real season starts now. Because winning the SEC was one of the goals, but I promise you, going back to back, that's on a lot of these folks' mind. This team, a lot of those guys that weren't starters on the defensive side, they want to go ahead and cement their legacy. Stetson Bennett, he still hears all the talk about himself. I promise you, he still feels like he's one of the best quarterbacks in the country. Said it post-game, I feel like I'm not too bad at football either, with all the talk about how good this team is and all the things that, he's done at Georgia. There's still a chip there on his shoulder. This team is multiple. This team is dangerous, can fight different styles. Whoever draws Georgia, they're hunting Georgia, but I promise you, Georgia is ready for the fight. So I'm excited to see what happens here the rest of the way. Excited to see the Dogs get their chance to get it on and popping in the playoff in a few short days. It's about to be here. We don't want you to miss a minute of it. Make sure you're subscribed. Make sure you're locked in. Going to be a whole lot of fun. But again, the Dogs, the big dogs eat. Once again, they are your SEC champions. They are the unquestioned #1 team in the country. Mic drop. Like Stetson Bennett. Mic drop. This has been The Hard Count. We appreciate you tuning in. Like I already mentioned, subscribe to the channel. Follow me on the socials at JDPakel on Twitter and on Instagram. We're not going to lead you astray. This is the place you want to be for college football coverage, not just during the season, but year-round. We're going to keep the party rolling, and we will see y'all next time. Hey, y'all. Thanks so much for watching. Subscribe to the channel here to make sure you don't miss an episode of The Hard Count. Also, be sure to check out other videos on the On3 YouTube channel.